September 9th, 2010. A large gas pipeline explodes in a small neighborhood in San Bruno, California. 38 homes were destroyed and 8 lives were lost. Volunteers rushed to the disaster site to help, and emergency responders directed them to the local Emergency Volunteer Center. You learned in Introduction to Emergency Volunteer Centers, Part 1 of this e-learning series, about the value of emergency volunteer centers during a disaster. Let's now consider the foundations of EVC operation. Successful operation will be based on your understanding of how and when to activate an EVC. You'll want to consider tools and resources available to you, as well as the structure, layout, and staffing requirements of an EVC. And lastly, how and when to demobilize EVC operations. Santa Clara County has identified 4 areas for EVC coordination, and 1 city is designated as the planning lead for each area. These designations allow flexibility to activate by city, area, or throughout the entire county. Mutual aid and assistance agreements also allow for broader reach. Volunteer coordination in Santa Clara County is based on the principles of the Standardized Emergency Management System, or SEMS, and the Incident Command System, or ICS.
Well, SEMS, are the Standardized Emergency Management System, was established after the Bay Area Oakland Hills fire, where there was a lot of challenges with multi-agency, multi-jurisdiction coordination. So SEMS basically defines clear roles and responsibilities from the incident all the way through the state. And so it defines what local government does, what regional entities like our Regional Emergency Operations Center's role and responsibility is, and what the clear role of the State Operations Center is.
State agencies are required to use it, and local government is incentivized to use it through eligibility for reimbursement. Consider this. You are asked to assist in a neighboring jurisdiction during a disaster. You are confident in your training, yet when you arrive, you discover they follow different procedures and sometimes even use different terminology. How does this shape your experience and the experience of those you are trying to help? SEMS incorporates ICS, an on-scene standardized approach to organize facilities, equipment, personnel, procedures, and communication.
Well, the Incident Command System is an organizational structure that is scalar, meaning we can build a small organizational structure and continue to add components to that organizational structure up to a very large incident. There's obviously going to be an incident commander. There's somebody in charge of operations, somebody in charge of planning, somebody in charge of logistics, and then somebody in charge of finance. Those are your basic components. In the event that you don't have the staff or resources to fill all those positions, you may only have one person, the incident commander, who wears all of those hats simultaneously. So the functions are still being done, but you may not have a separate person doing it. The beauty of the Incident Command System, and probably the greatest thing about it, is its portability. It can be utilized to manage virtually any kind of event. So the ability for me as a fire officer to work within my own organization and understand how the Incident Command System works and where I fit within it on a given incident is exactly the same as it would if I went to Southern California. It's the portability of the system that really makes it so essential for everyday use.
Activating an emergency volunteer center is a decision that's made through the management section of the Emergency Operations Center.
An EVC may be activated if nonprofits, government, and spontaneous volunteers begin taking on response and recovery efforts, or if the number of citizens who want to help become a burden for local response agencies. A request from the county operational area or a city emergency operations center may also prompt an EVC activation. The decision to activate the EVC is quickly followed by location considerations unless the activation warrants a call-in or online center. Imagine that you are responsible for selecting a physical location for an EVC. What types of facility logistics would you consider? First, you must ensure that the physical layout is suitable for registration, training, and volunteer referral. Check for adequate parking. The location must be easy to find, have restrooms on site, phone and network capabilities, and be ADA compliant. Further considerations may include the need for security.
So an emergency volunteer center would need security primarily to protect their staff, but also to protect those volunteers that are coming, as well as you want to secure the facility. It's important so that equipment don't go wandering off.
Next, establish hours of operation for the EVC. Plan for food and water for staff, as well as any other supplies that will be needed. And finally, establish communication with the local EOC. The EVC Resource Kit was developed to enhance consistency and sustainability of the EVC program. It provides hands-on tools, training information, and preparedness and response materials for quick startup of an EVC following a disaster.
You know, we don't keep this information in our minds. At 3 o'clock in the morning when we need to stand up some kind of operation for a disaster, we have to have information quickly.
The EVC Resource Kit was designed to create more just-in-time training tools for local jurisdictions. As we saw increasing turnover, we wanted to provide tools that even if they had staff that weren't trained in operating an EVC, they could set one and get it up and running very quickly.
Use the Quick Start Guide, a clipboard plan designed for immediate EVC activation, including setup procedures and a flowchart for layout.
The Quick Start Guide is very useful. It basically tells you exactly how to set up your EVC. It has a checklist on what needs to be done, what roles and responsibilities need to be assigned. It includes information on the forms.
Lanyard tags can be used to quickly identify various staff roles.
Each of the staff have a badge that they can use. On the back of the badge, it's got their description of what they're supposed to do. It's a quick reference they can turn to.
You'll also find descriptions of standardized volunteer positions, such as shelter assistant, animal care, runner, or sandbag assistant. Consider this. How would you describe an EVC operation to a group of community-based organizations? Customized Santa Clara County training curriculum is included for jurisdictions to conduct their own EVC training.
The training module in the EVC Resource Kit is designed for local jurisdictions to take the training back to their own staff.
Tools include a PowerPoint presentation with notes, a marketing flyer, agenda, and handouts, an EVC exercise packet, an icebreaker, and standardized evaluation form. The informational video, used with permission from the Bay Area Urban Area Security Initiative, is a great educational resource on the role of EVCs. Share it with first responders, elected officials, EOC staff, department directors, community-based organizations, citizen corps programs, and other affiliated volunteers. Similarly, EVC brochures are another operational tool that describes concepts, levels of activation, benefits, and how various groups can support EVCs. Standardized press releases can be accessed on the USB drive included in the EVC Resource Kit. Electronic versions are also available at www.evc-santaclaracounty.org. One of the very first considerations is to determine who will assign the initial volunteers and staff to operate the EVC.
We live in a very diverse community demographically, so you want to get people that are familiar with different languages, different cultures. We look at HR professionals, human resource professionals to staff the volunteer center because they really know how to match tasks that are necessary with what the knowledge and abilities are necessary. We do that every day on our job. So even if you've never worked in an emergency, you still have the necessary skill sets to do that kind of matching.
Within Santa Clara County, all cities and the county should have identified staff who would manage the EVCs for their jurisdiction. Ideally, 2 or more people are pre-trained for each position to set up and operate an EVC. There is a specific layout of an EVC that allows for volunteers and staff to easily move through the intake and referral process. Let's take a look at the EVC layout and review staffing positions along the way.
So you have reception, people greeting people as they're coming in, intake, data collection, so they're coordinating the requests with who you have available, and then communication. Communication is important because there's a lot of communication already going on, so you want to make sure you're getting the correct word out.
The first point of contact for a spontaneous volunteer is the reception station. Positioned near the entrance, this area includes a minimum of 1 table and 2 chairs with a designated waiting area close by. Receptionists serve as gatekeepers. They greet volunteers and distribute and collect intake forms. Because the position is the first point of contact, it may by default serve as an information desk.
The receptionist is the first person the volunteer sees. The receptionist sets the tone, gives them a layout of the operations center, tells them what the process is, provides them the forms that they need, and then is just basically available to answer questions.
When volunteers have completed their intake form, receptionists will direct them to the waiting area until they move on to the next stage of the process. The intake and referral station requires the largest amount of staff and therefore is set up with several tables and chairs. Here, each volunteer meets with a trained interviewer who suggests an appropriate volunteer opportunity based on the volunteer's skills, experience, and availability identified in the completed intake form.
The interviewer is responsible for making sure that they can glean as much information from the volunteer as possible. If they speak another language, if they have a driver's license classification that may be different, if they can lift heavy weights, if they have experience with daycares or that sort of thing.
Volunteers who are referred to a position with a government agency proceed to the station for disaster service worker volunteer registration.
Disaster service worker is a person that has been sworn in by the local jurisdiction to work in a disaster and only doing what they've been trained to do.
Not anyone can be a disaster service worker. County employees are disaster service workers. Disaster service workers are vetted so that they know what they're supposed to do and they're trained and they have specific roles they play.
There are many steps involved in disaster service worker volunteer registration. These may include completing the DSW volunteer registration form, a placement interview, and being sworn in under a loyalty oath. City and county clerks can administer the loyalty oath or authorize other government employees staffing the EVC to administer it either on site or at the assignment location.
Can a volunteer be sworn in as the disaster service worker in the event of an emergency? Absolutely they can. That's kind of the role that a normal HR person in my office might take on in a disaster. They would report to the EOC or to a emergency volunteer center or wherever they're needed, and they would be the ones that would organize that and then swear people in from volunteer status to being a disaster service worker.
There are other areas that fulfill critical responsibilities, though they don't interface with volunteers directly. They include volunteer opportunities, data coordination, communications, EVC management, and assistant management. Let's take a look at how each of these roles functions within the EVC. Here, the Volunteer Opportunities Coordinators work with organizations to identify volunteer opportunities.
So the volunteer coordinator actually serves as the liaison between the EVC and the agencies that are requesting the volunteers.
They assist with completion of volunteer request forms and, by maintaining regular contact, inform organizations when their requests for volunteers have been filled. The Volunteer Opportunities Coordinator may also provide guidance to agencies on volunteer orientation and supervision. It is the responsibility of the agency requesting the volunteer to conduct adequate screening.
Emergency volunteer centers are designed to provide intake, to take information in about a volunteer and then direct them to an appropriate agency that is a match for their skills and availability where they live within the county. Once the volunteer arrives at that agency, for example, a food bank, an American Red Cross, it's that agency's responsibility to screen the volunteer, match them to the appropriate job, and then effectively orient, train, and manage that volunteer.
The Data Coordination Station is staffed by a volunteer data coordinator who develops and implements either a manual or electronic system for tracking volunteer referrals.
We need to collect the information from the agency specific as to what their needs are. What types of volunteers do they need?
They collect information from EVC interviewers and inform the Volunteer Opportunities Station when requests are filled. They are also responsible for a daily report that accounts for the number of volunteers referred.
Data collection can be very challenging because it can be very hectic and you're not really thinking of collecting data. But the things that are important to collect is number of volunteers, where you set up your EVCs, how you deployed your volunteers. So a lot of that, whether you were able to fulfill all the needs or what was left unfulfilled, do some sort of gap analysis, like this is what we were short on, this is what we had plenty on. So numbers are very important because you're going to be doing some after-action reports and providing that data to your managers.
The communication station serves as a central hub of information. This pivotal role is performed by the communications coordinator, who establishes all forms of EVC communication.
Communication station is usually bringing outside information into an EVC manager. We needed one point of communicating with the outside, whether it be via ham radio operator, fax machine, phone, messenger, now using web-based messaging, text messaging, that we had one source of collecting information and then distributing it appropriately within the EVC.
It's here that all incoming and outgoing communications are managed, including interactions with the EOC or other agencies, and maintaining a communications log. The EVC manager is not a station, but moves throughout the EVC to oversee all functions as needed. The manager's responsibilities begin with setup, continue through operations, and even include demobilization of the EVC. They are the ones to assign and supervise lead EVC staff. The EVC manager requests staff or other resources from the EOC. They maintain communication with the EOC and closely monitor all operations, making changes as needed. The manager also handles all press-related inquiries in coordination with EOC's Public Information Officer.
Our public information officers are going to get actively involved in television production, radio production, utilization of the reverse 911 system to network with all of the phone numbers registered in the area, letting everybody know where to respond if they are able to help.
In some instances, an EVC will also be staffed with an assistant manager who supports the manager in all their responsibilities and may stand in for them if necessary.
Well, the EVC manager is the one that's ultimately responsible for that emergency volunteer center. However, the assistant is the eyes and ears of the manager, the person that is watching out for those things that maybe the manager just doesn't see, or the things that become too complicated or too quick moving for the manager to be able to manage solely.
Take a moment to consider the following scenario. You are involved in an EVC's disaster response effort. Considering the tools, resources, and guidelines we've discussed, along with the various roles that need to be filled, at which ones would you be most effective? While everyone plays an integral part, these functions work together to form an organized and structured response. By its very nature, an emergency situation is characterized by disorder and chaos, but adhering to such structural protocol provides the greatest opportunity for an EVC's successful response effort. It's important to plan ahead for demobilization, even in the beginning stages of EVC operation.
An Emergency Volunteer Center, as a subset of the logistics section, considers demobilization from day one. We never want to use resources that are not necessary for the response, and we want to give people a chance to get back to normal as soon as possible.
An EVC manager will begin demobilization when there is a decrease in volunteer activity. They will communicate with the EOC and announce the date and time of demobilization to all staff and volunteers. If necessary, they also determine when to transfer intake and placement responsibilities to another entity. During demobilization, all relevant forms and reports are filed with the EOC. This includes cost tracking that follows FEMA guidelines, as well as an after-action report and any lessons learned. Once reviewed, these lessons learned may be included in a process of corrective action. Here's what you should know. Santa Clara County has designated leads for volunteer coordination that follow standardized SEMS and ICS systems. There are specific criteria that warrant EVC activation. This decision is quickly followed by location considerations. The EVC toolkit includes many resources that enable quick setup and operation. Follow all EVC plans regarding structure, layout, and staff for maximum organization and efficiency. A demobilization plan has many components and should be considered from the start. Access additional resources and learn more about EVC management at www.evc-santaclaracounty.org.